So I know you mentioned earlier in the interview that there aren't any proper treatments for main diseases like Parkinson's or epilepsy. And I know you also mentioned how um brain-computer interfaces are being created to target such problems. But what ethical concerns could arise from these advancements in neuroscience research and brain-enhancing technologies?
Yeah, so the ethics are market driven, right? So right now, the way to provide safe, so first of all, these devices have to be, if they're going to be used for patients in a clinical setting, have to be FDA approved. And so if something is FDA approved, it has to be proven safe and efficacious, right? So you can't just implant anything, right? It has to undergo stringent evaluation, that the materials that are used are not going to cause a problem, that the implant procedure is safe and is considered safe by the general clinician physician community, and that the way it's deployed and what it's used for is efficacious for that disease. The ethics of who gains access to those treatments is another problem. Now, the problem is that if you're in, some country that does not have the means or the funds or the doctors that can be trained because it's expensive, then they don't have access to it, right? So that's a problem, right? So, and these are expensive therapies, right? So these are not cheap to make, right? And they're not cheap to implant, and you have to have, quite a bit of training to do this. Now, some groups are saying, oh, we can automate the surgery, right, and have surgical implant without a physician, or maybe just somebody watching closely, and maybe that will democratize the capability for the implants. Other, you know, things may occur. So now, if we're talking about, and again, that could democratize it to the point where these devices could be provided to uh, countries and or populations that don't have the funds that the US has, and the framework of healthcare that we have here work, right? So like literally, you can change the reward circuitry. You could potentially improve learning. You could improve many different aspects of cognition. The issue is, again, is it available? Who's it available to? What is the availability of the technology? How much does it cost? Who can afford it? Whether or not it's a good thing to improve cognition and to have an interface with, for instance, artificial intelligence, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that's something that may happen sooner than we think. And it may be the only way that we can eventually interface with these machines. But it doesn't, the issue is, how do we democratize it? There has to be a framework and a policy that allows for the government and institutions to provide access to this knowledge. So for instance, if you had ChatGPT in your head at all times, right, and you knew all knowledge that is available at any second, that could make you a very productive person. But it also may have repercussions that we don't know about yet, right? So if you had all that information at your fingertips at all times, potentially those networks that we talked about that we've evolved over millions and millions of years, that's how our brain works because it evolved that way, may have repercussions that we don't know yet that could occur, right? So it could put people into, you know, um, mental health disorder types of states that we don't know could occur, or it could not, right? Or there could be ways to mitigate that. We just don't know yet. And so for anybody to say that they, you know, have a good sense of the neuroethics of these device technologies, I really don't trust anybody in what they're saying is in that, because we just don't know the answer, and we don't know how the brain will react. We don't know how society will react, and we don't know, what the policy makers and what the governments across the world will implement. and whether it's necessary or not. And that's the other kind of question is, are these technologies necessary for us to move forward? Are they detrimental? Right? So, it's unclear. I don't think there's a good answer. I do think that we should provide as the technology as broadly as possible. But there's so many unknowns as to the effects of the technology. It's just we don't know the answer yet.